They always tell you the Titanic story ends when the great ship slips beneath the surface. They say the moment the lights vanish and the stern disappears into the black water, the tragedy is complete. But that has never been true. The worst part did not happen on the ship. It happened afterward, in the silence that followed. And if you listen closely now as you settle into your pillows and let the world around you fade, you might hear what the survivors heard in that silence. It was not peace. It was the sound of a world breaking open. Take a slow breath. Feel the weight of the blankets around you. Make sure you are warm and safe, because where we are going, nothing was warm and nothing was safe. Picture this moment as clearly as you can. It is around 4 in the morning on April 15th, 1912. You are sitting in a wooden lifeboat with 30 other human beings who are holding onto the sides as if the ocean might swallow them at any second. The floor of the boat is slick with ice. Your hands are stiff. Your breath hangs in the air like a small, wandering ghost, and the Atlantic stretches around you in an endless sheet of black glass. Just hours ago, you watched the largest ship in the world rise out of the water, break apart, and fall into darkness. The screams of more than 1,500 souls echoed across the sea. Then, one by one, the voices faded until there was only the sound of waves tapping against the hull of your lifeboat. Now, the air is silent. Terribly silent. The kind of silence that makes your heartbeat sound too loud. The kind that makes you afraid to breathe. You look around at the people beside you. Some cry softly into their hands. Some sit frozen, staring straight ahead. Others whisper prayers in languages you do not understand. A woman keeps repeating her husband's name as if he might answer from somewhere in the dark. You want to comfort her, but your lips are too numb to move. You want to believe the night will end soon, but dawn feels impossibly far away. Your toes have stopped hurting. That is not a good sign. Your fingers feel like they belong to someone else. Somewhere behind you, a man is shaking so violently that the whole lifeboat moves with him. He is not cold delirious anymore. He is silent delirious, which is worse. You hold the edge of the boat tightly, your knuckles turning white under the frost. All you can do now is wait. Wait for a light, a sound, anything that suggests rescue is coming. In the middle of this floating nightmare sits a man who will become, within a matter of days, the most hated man in America. His name is Bruce Ismay. At this moment, he is just another survivor clinging to life, trembling with cold and fear. But he is also the chairman of the White Star Line, the company that built the ship you just watched die. And when people learn he survived while so many women and children did not, they will carve his name into history with the word coward beside it. But none of that has happened yet. Right now, he is only a human being in a lifeboat, staring at the place where the Titanic used to be, unable to look away from the darkness. Hours crawl by. Minutes feel like winters. Then, far away on the horizon, someone sees something move. A faint light. A speck of hope. At first you think it is your eyes playing tricks, but then the light grows clearer. It shifts, flickers, and multiplies. A ship is coming, a real ship. The Carpathia, racing through ice fields at dangerous speed, answering the Titanic's final desperate call. When that realization spreads through the lifeboat, the energy changes. People sit taller. They lean forward as if getting closer might bring the ship to them faster. A woman sobs into her hands, not out of grief this time, but relief. You feel your heartbeat quicken, not with fear, but with the small, flickering warmth of survival. As the Carpathia approaches, the crew leans over the rails, shouting down instructions. They lower rope ladders and canvas slings. They reach out hands to pull half-frozen bodies aboard. You can hear the urgency in their voices. They had been preparing all night, turning dining rooms into makeshift hospitals, warming blankets, heating broth, praying they would arrive in time for someone, anyone. When you finally touch the Carpathia's wooden deck, a wave of warmth sweeps over you, not because the temperature is any higher, but because you are no longer surrounded by death. Blankets wrap around your shoulders. Someone offers you a cup of hot cocoa that shakes in your numb hands. The smell of it makes your eyes sting. You whisper thank you, even though your mouth is barely working. Around you, the suffering becomes impossible to ignore. People with broken limbs, people whose minds seem to have fractured somewhere in the freezing dark, people who cannot speak, whose eyes stare into nothing, and people like Harold Bride, the 22-year-old wireless operator whose feet are so frostbitten they are almost black. Yet he insists on sitting beside the Carpathia's wireless set, sending messages to anxious families waiting on shore. He taps the key through the pane, each click telling the world who is alive and who is not. He is a reminder that bravery often looks quiet. It looks tired. It looks like someone refusing to stop helping, even when they are falling apart. Somewhere else on the ship, Bruce Ismay locks himself inside a small cabin. He does not speak. He does not sleep. He does not eat anything but broth. He stares at the wall until his eyes stop blinking. He has not yet been called a coward. Not yet. But the weight of what the world will soon believe is already crushing him. He breathes shallowly, as if afraid the air itself is watching. Meanwhile, New York has no idea what is coming. Newspapers have printed wild guesses. Some claim the Titanic is still afloat and being towed to Halifax. Others insist all passengers survived. Some are already preparing triumph stories about a miracle rescue. Nobody is prepared for the truth. In Washington, Senator William Alden Smith reads the chaotic headlines and feels his stomach twist. He has sailed with Captain Smith before. He trusted him, respected him. Now the captain is dead, and the senator wants to know why. The president offers no direction, lost in grief for a friend who died aboard the ship. So Senator Smith takes action. He drafts a resolution overnight demanding a federal investigation. He wants answers before survivors scatter back to England, beyond the reach of American subpoenas. He wants to know who failed and why the ocean claimed so many lives. But for now, the Carpathia continues its slow journey to New York, carrying 700 shattered souls, each with their own painful version of the same terrible night. Some cry until they cannot cry anymore. Some huddle in silence. Some stare into the dark ocean as if trying to find faces of the people they loved. And some sit alone, numb and trembling, unable to understand why they made it when others did not. This is the part of the Titanic story people forget. The part where survival does not feel like rescue. It feels like stepping out of one tragedy and into the beginning of another. It feels like a night that will never end, even as the sky begins to brighten with the first hint of dawn. You breathe slowly now, letting the weight of the chapter settle like a gentle tide. The story is only beginning, but you are here, warm, safe, drifting towards sleep while we follow the survivors into a world that is not ready for the truth they carry. When the Carpathia finally approached New York Harbor, the city was wrapped in a heavy, misty rain, as if the sky itself understood that grief was approaching. Along the piers, thousands of people pressed against one another, holding umbrellas, newspapers, and hope that was about to break. They had been waiting for days, clinging to wildly conflicting reports. Some newspapers insisted the Titanic was still afloat. Others promised every passenger had been saved. A few printed quiet, cautious lines suggesting a tragedy beyond comprehension. But no one knew for certain, not until the Carpathia's lights appeared through the rain. Before the ship even docked, the crowd fell silent. It was not the reverent silence of a ceremony. It was the kind of silence that happens when thousands of hearts realize at the same moment that the truth is far worse than anything they imagined. The Carpathia moved slowly, almost painfully slowly, toward Pier 54. The sound of the rain tapping against umbrellas was louder than the crowd. The world held its breath. You stand on the deck among the survivors, wrapped in a borrowed blanket that still smells faintly of smoke from the Carpathia's boilers. The New York skyline rises around you, tall and solid and unshaken by tragedy. For a moment it feels unreal that you have survived something so incomprehensible. And yet here you are, drifting toward a city that continues to glow with electric lights, utterly unaware of the nightmare floating toward its shores. A woman beside you grips your arm as if the sight of land might cause her to fall apart. You do not pull away. You understand. Land feels like the first step toward admitting that the ocean did not take you, even though it took almost everything else. As the ship pulls closer, reporters begin shouting questions from small boats swarming around the hull. Flashbulbs explode in bright bursts. Some survivors flinch, mistaking the flashes for the violent snap of breaking steel. Others simply stare. A few cover their faces with blankets. They are not ready for the world, and the world is not prepared for them either. This is a city expecting miraculous news, not a floating tomb. When the Carpathia finally docks, the gangways lower, but the first things brought ashore are not people. They are the Titanic's lifeboats. One by one, the wooden vessels are hoisted into the air, dripping with Atlantic salt and grief. Each boat swings gently as it rises, like a cradle, holding the echo of screams. People in the crowd gasp. Some begin to cry. They know now, no ship that returned with its lifeboats full was a ship that had been saved. Only after the lifeboats are set on the pier do the survivors begin to disembark. Some walk with dazed mechanical steps. Others must be carried. Blankets cling to shivering bodies like cocoons. Reporters lean in so close that survivors can feel their breath, but few have the strength to respond. A man collapses the moment his foot touches the pier. A nurse kneels beside him. A little girl wanders through the crowd, calling for her mother, though no one has the heart to tell her that the Atlantic has already answered her. Senator William Alden Smith watches all of this from the pier, the brim of his hat dripping with rain. He sees the lifeboats, he sees the pale faces, he sees the trembling, exhausted bodies. And in that moment he knows the United States cannot wait. If he does not act now, the truth will vanish across the ocean with the returning passengers. England will protect its shipbuilders. The White Star Line will close ranks. Silence will bury accountability as surely as the Atlantic buried the ship. So the senator steps forward determined. He will begin the investigation immediately before anyone can escape the jurisdiction of American law. Meanwhile, Bruce Ismay is escorted off the Carpathia under heavy guard. He is wrapped in a blanket and shielded from cameras by several officers. Flashbulbs keep exploding around him like silent lightning. People gasp, point, whisper. Some begin to shout. A woman cries out, demanding to know why he lived while her husband did not. He keeps his eyes fixed on the ground. His shoulders shake not from cold, but from shame, grief, and the crushing realization that he is no longer a titan of industry. He is the face of survival that the world does not want. Inside the pier, the Red Cross has set up long tables with food, blankets, telegram forms, and volunteers prepared for unimaginable grief. Families push forward with trembling hands, holding slips of paper, hoping to hear a single name. Survivors are guided into warm rooms where their names are recorded one by one. Each name brings relief to some distant household, but most of the telegrams that will be sent tonight will carry no comfort. The list of the lost is already impossibly long. As you step inside the pier, the warmth of the building hits you in a slow wave. You breathe deeply, feeling your lungs expand for what feels like the first time since the ship went down. But the relief is quickly replaced by disorientation. People ask for your name, they ask what you saw, they ask if you need medical attention, if you have family to contact, if there was anyone with you on the boat. You try to answer, but your voice comes out thin and strange. A volunteer nods with understanding and guides you gently to a seat. She places a warm drink in your hands. The steam rises in spirals, and you watch it as if it were the most mesmerizing thing in the world. Somewhere in the building, a man begins to sob loudly. His legs buckle beneath him and he falls to the floor. 2 volunteers rush to help, but he pushes them away. He has just learned that his wife and children are gone. His grief is a sound that pierces the entire hall. People look up, eyes wide, hands trembling. They realize that they too are about to receive news that will haunt them for decades. Survivors from third class sit quietly in small groups, unsure of their place in this chaotic scene. Many do not speak English well. Some do not speak it at all. They clutch their few belongings still wrapped in salt-stained cloth. Their names are often misspelled on the lists. Their stories are not sought by reporters. They are the forgotten souls of a tragedy that will soon focus on the famous, the wealthy, and the scandalous. The inequity that governed the Titanic has followed them onto land. As the night deepens, the pier becomes a strange mixture of grief and fragile relief. Some families embrace, others collapse. Some survivors lift their faces to the ceiling as if searching for an answer in the rafters. The Red Cross quietly hands out clothes to those who lost everything. A little boy receives a pair of shoes and stares at them for a long time before putting them on. They do not fit perfectly, but they are warm. Near dawn, Senator Smith gathers several survivors into a private room inside the Waldorf Hotel. He needs testimony before memories fade, before stories blur, before lawyers intervene. The survivors sit in chairs arranged in a stiff semicircle. The senator's voice is calm but firm. He asks what they saw, how many lifeboats they counted, whether officers refused to lower boats, whether the ship slowed down after receiving ice warnings, whether binoculars were available to the lookouts, whether the captain was cautious or reckless. Some survivors answer with painful clarity. Others shake their heads overwhelmed. A few break down entirely. The senator writes furiously. He knows the world will judge this tragedy based on the words spoken here tonight. Outside, the city sleeps without understanding the magnitude of what has arrived at its shores. The skyscrapers gleam through the rainfall. Carriages move slowly through the wet streets. Somewhere, a bakery begins its early morning shift. The world continues, unaware that the greatest peacetime maritime disaster in history has just delivered not only survivors, but questions that will ignite political firestorms. You watch all of this from a quiet corner, wrapped in your blanket, feeling as though you are standing between 2 worlds. Behind you is the night of the sinking, a night that will live in your dreams for years. Before you is a world ready to dissect your trauma, to turn your survival into testimony, headlines and debate. You feel the weight of it settling over your shoulders. Someone approaches and asks if you have anywhere to go. You hesitate. You do not know how to answer. You did have a destination. You did have plans. But everything changed in the freezing dark. The person nods gently, understanding, without explanation, and leads you toward a row of cots where survivors can sleep. You lie down slowly, letting the blanket cover you like a cocoon. The fabric is soft. The sounds are distant. For the first time since the ship began to tilt, your body starts to unclench. Your eyes close, not in peace but in exhaustion. The pier fades into darkness. The rain softens to a whisper. And as sleep begins to pull you under, you realize that the story is no longer just about survival. It is about what comes after. It is about truth, justice, and the strange, painful journey that begins when the sinking ends. Morning arrives in New York like a thin grey veil pulled gently across the city. The air is heavy with mist, and the buildings seem to rise out of it like solemn giants, standing guard over a world that has changed overnight. You wake slowly, wrapped in a blanket that still carries the scent of salt and rain. For a moment, you do not remember where you are. Then the memories rush in, dark and cold and merciless. The pier, the reporters, the lifeboats hanging like ghosts above the water, and the look on people's faces when they finally understood the truth. You sit up slowly, rubbing your eyes. Around you, other survivors rest on cots arranged in uneven rows. Some sleep with their hands clenched into fists. Some twitch violently, caught in dreams they cannot escape. A few sit motionless, staring blankly at the ceiling as if sleep is too far away to reach. Volunteers move quietly between the cots, offering warm drinks and soft voices. Nobody raises their voice here. Grief has its own kind of silence, and everyone respects it. Outside, New York is waking to the news. Headlines scream from newsstands across the city. Words like Titanic disaster, unthinkable loss, and tragedy at sea. Crowds gather on street corners, reading aloud, arguing, weeping, demanding answers. And above all, the noise rises one name again and again: White Star Line. At the Waldorf Hotel, Senator William Alden Smith sits at a long, polished table with documents spread before him. His eyes are red from lack of sleep, but his resolve is sharp. He knows what must come next. He has already summoned ship officers, crew members, passengers, and even members of the press. The hearings will begin today. There is no time to waste. Too many people want the truth buried before it can reach the surface. By noon, the ballroom of the Waldorf has been transformed into a makeshift courtroom. Heavy curtains muffle the city noise outside, and bright electric lamps illuminate every corner of the room. Rows of wooden chairs have been arranged for survivors and spectators. At the front, a raised platform holds the senators, stenographers, and a single empty witness chair. The room fills quickly. Journalists in crisp suits take their places, notebooks ready, pencils sharpened. Photographers adjust their tripod legs and whisper to one another about angles and framing. Lawyers from the White Star Line sit stiffly, their faces carved into masks of controlled worry. Survivors enter slowly, guided by volunteers, their steps uneven. Some lean on canes borrowed from the Red Cross. Others walk barefoot because their shoes were lost in the chaos. A few sit with blankets wrapped around their shoulders, shivering despite the heat of the lamps. You take your seat near the back, grateful for the dimmer light there. You are not ready to speak, not ready to be examined or questioned, but you feel compelled to be here, to watch the truth unfold, even if it breaks you to hear it. At precisely 1 o'clock, Senator Smith enters the room. He removes his hat slowly, almost ceremonially, and steps to the center. His face is solemn, but there is fire in his eyes. He speaks quietly at first, thanking the survivors for their courage, acknowledging their suffering, and expressing condolences for those they lost. The room listens with reverent stillness. Then his voice grows stronger. Today, he says, we begin the process of understanding what happened on the night of April 15th. We will not allow confusion or speculation to cloud the truth. We seek clarity, justice, and accountability. The first witness called is the Carpathia's captain, Arthur Rostron. He is a calm man, steady and composed, though exhaustion lines his face. He sits in the witness chair with his hat resting on his lap and answers every question with measured precision. He describes the moment he received the Titanic's distress signal. He recalls pushing his ship faster than it had ever been sailed before, navigating through ice fields lit only by the faint glow of stars. He speaks of preparing lifeboats, warming blankets, boiling water, and instructing his crew to treat the rescue as if every delay could cost another life. When he describes the lifeboats drifting alone in the icy dark, the room falls completely silent. Even the stenographer pauses for a moment, stunned by the weight of his words. The captain's voice never trembles, but the sorrow behind it is unmistakable. Next, a surviving officer from the Titanic takes the stand, his uniform still wrinkled and stained from the ordeal. His hands shake slightly as he is sworn in. He answers questions about lifeboat procedures, chain of command, and the ship's speed. When asked if the Titanic received ice warnings earlier in the day, he hesitates. A long moment passes. Every reporter in the room leans forward, sensing something important. "Yes," he finally says. "Several warnings were received." "Were they heeded?" Senator Smith asks. Another long silence. "No," the officer whispers. His voice cracks, barely audible. "They were not." A ripple spreads through the room. Reporters scribble furiously. Lawyers shift in their seats. Survivors stare at the officer with a mixture of anger and heartbreak. You feel your hands curling into fists without meaning to. The ship was warned. The ship was warned, and nothing changed. The officer is asked about lifeboat drills. There had been none. He is asked whether the crew knew their stations. Many did not. He is asked why so many lifeboats left partially empty. He tries to explain, but his words fall apart. He lowers his eyes, trapped between the duty to tell the truth and the shame of having lived through it. Then comes the question that everyone has been waiting for. Did the Titanic slow its speed after receiving the ice warnings? He closes his eyes before answering. "No," he says softly. "We maintain near top speed." A murmur rises through the room, hushed but powerful. You feel a strange coldness moving through your chest. Not like the Atlantic's cold, but something deeper, like a blade made of disbelief and anger. When the officer steps down, he looks like a man carrying a mountain on his back. After him comes testimony from crew members, firemen, stewards, and passengers. Some speak clearly, some stumble through their stories. A few break down entirely and must be escorted from the room. One woman describes the sound of the ship breaking in half. Another recalls the way the deck tilted beneath her feet. A third describes trying to climb into a lifeboat while a crowd pressed against her from behind like a single, desperate living creature. The hearings continue into the evening. Lamps burn hot. Reporters refill their ink bottles. Survivors shift in their seats, exhausted but unable to leave. You sit quietly, absorbing every word, watching as the truth unfolds piece by painful piece, like a wound being carefully opened. And then in the late hours of the day, Bruce Ismay enters. He walks slowly, dressed in a dark suit, his face pale and hollow. A murmur fills the room. People sit straighter, some glare, others whisper angrily. Ismay takes the witness chair, and for a long moment he does not speak. He does not even blink. He stares at the table before him as if it might swallow him whole. Senator Smith begins gently, asking about the construction of the ship, the number of lifeboats, the decisions made before departure. Ismay answers carefully, each word weighed, measured, sanitized. But when the questioning shifts to the night of the sinking, something changes in him. His voice tightens, his hands tremble. He avoids the eyes of every survivor in the room. When asked why he boarded a lifeboat while hundreds were still on deck, silence floods the ballroom. Ismay swallows hard. His throat bobs. Reporters lean forward, pencils frozen above paper. Finally, he says, in a voice strained and brittle, "There were no women or children near that boat. I believed I was not taking a place from anyone. It is not an answer. It is a wound." People in the room exhale sharply. Some shake their heads. A woman begins to cry softly. You feel your jaw tighten. You do not know if he is lying or if he is merely telling himself a story he can survive. By the time the hearing adjourns for the night, everyone is drained. Reporters gather in tense clusters. Lawyers whisper urgently. Survivors leave slowly, touching the walls as they walk, as if needing something solid to anchor them. You step out into the cool night air, the city lights glowing softly around you. The hearing has revealed truth, but it has also revealed something more unsettling. The tragedy did not end in the water. It lives on in the decisions of men, in the arrogance of systems, in the fragile balance between caution and pride. You breathe deeply, letting the night fill your lungs. The truth is rising, but so are the shadows it casts. Somewhere above the city, the moon drifts behind a cloud. The world grows dimmer, quieter, softer. And as you take your first steps toward the hotel where survivors are being sheltered, you realize that the story is only beginning to unfold. The deepest wounds have not yet been uncovered. The hearings in New York ripple across the Atlantic like aftershocks from an earthquake. By the time the Carpathia's survivors have settled into temporary lodging and Senator Smith's investigation gathers momentum, Britain is already preparing its own defense. In London, government officials, shipbuilders, and representatives of the White Star Line work tirelessly behind closed doors, shaping a narrative meant to shield not the victims, but the system that allowed the disaster to happen in the first place. The British Board of Trade announces its own inquiry into the sinking of the Titanic. It will be held in a grand, echoing chamber in Westminster, a place built for prestige, not for grief. Reporters gather in flocks outside the building, their breath clouding in the morning air. Sketch artists sit on small stools, capturing the faces of important men arriving in polished carriages. The inquiry is advertised as a search for truth, but many already know what it will become. A carefully orchestrated defense of British maritime pride. Meanwhile, in New York, survivors live in a strange limbo. Some remain in hotels provided by charitable organizations. Others are hosted by relatives or taken in by strangers who opened their homes out of mercy. You find yourself staying in a quiet guest house on the Upper West Side, its rooms filled with people who survived the same night you did. The walls are thin. Sometimes, in the deepest hours of the night, you hear someone crying softly, trying to hide their grief beneath their blankets. Other times you hear a sudden gasp or a choked scream, the sound of someone waking from the memory of icy water rushing toward their face. Each morning, newspapers deliver new accounts of the Senate hearings, headlines about negligence, ignored warnings, and lifeboats leaving half empty. You read the words slowly, letting them sink into your mind the way the ships sank into the sea. Each sentence is both a vindication and a wound. The truth is rising, but it is messy, complicated, painful. And now, Britain is preparing its own version of the truth. Across the ocean, the British inquiry opens with ceremony. Men in tailored suits sit behind high wooden desks. Thick volumes of maritime law rest on tables like sacred texts. The chairman, Lord Mersey, presides with the air of a man who already knows the ending of the story. He is respected, dignified, and appointed precisely because he can be trusted to maintain the reputation of British shipping. Witnesses take the stand one by one. Crew members who survived the sinking sit stiffly, hats in their hands. Officers explain procedures in calm, rehearsed voices. Shipbuilders argue passionately about steel quality design, rivets, and watertight compartments. They speak as though speaking about a machine, not a tragedy. Their language is precise, technical, sanitized. They argue diagrams and calculations while avoiding the human cost hidden beneath their words. Every time someone mentions that the Titanic exceeded the Board of Trade's outdated lifeboat requirements, the room relaxes. Every time someone mentions that the lookouts had no binoculars, the room grows tense. Every time someone hints that the ship was encouraged to break speed records, lawyers rise to object. Slowly, carefully, the narrative begins to form. The sinking was tragic, but unavoidable. A natural disaster, an unfortunate accident, a blameless catastrophe. No one says the words out loud, but you can feel their shape forming beneath the testimony like a shadow. If nobody is at fault, then nobody must pay. While Britain constructs its defense, you attend another day of hearings in New York. The ballroom remains packed. Reporters fill every seat. Survivors stand along the back wall, their bodies swaying with fatigue. The air feels thick with heat from the lamps. You sit quietly, watching new witnesses take the stand. A fireman named George tells the story of working deep within the ship, shoveling coal beside roaring furnaces. He describes how the hull trembled when the iceberg struck, how water rushed into the boiler rooms, and how the men worked until the rising flood forced them to flee. He explains that their labor bought the ship extra minutes, precious minutes, that saved lives above them. He speaks gently, his voice rough but sincere. When he finishes, the room applauds softly. It is not protocol, but no one can help it. The moment feels holy. Then a young stewardess testifies. Her voice is fragile, but she holds herself straight. She describes helping women into lifeboats, soothing panicked children, and comforting a mother who refused to leave her husband behind. Her words tremble with grief, but she never looks away from the senators. When she finishes, she wipes a tear from her cheek and steps down gracefully, as though leaving a stage she never wished to stand upon. Throughout the day, people speak of class. They speak hesitantly at first, as though ashamed to criticize a system that has shaped their entire lives. But the truth is too heavy to keep buried. Passengers in third class describe iron gates and narrow hallways. They speak of searching for a way to reach the upper decks, only to find locked doors and confusing passages. They recall stewards telling them to wait, telling them everything was under control, even as water filled the lower compartments. They speak of parents lifting children over barriers, praying someone above would take them. One man chokes on his words as he describes watching a lifeboat lowering without him, his wife, or their daughters. They had been told to remain calm. They had followed instructions. They had trusted the crew. And now he stands here alone. People in first class describe a different experience entirely. They talk about polite instructions, orderly lines, and officers escorting them to the lifeboats with gentle reassurance. They speak of stepping into boats with seats to spare. Some admit through tears that they begged the crew to return for those left behind. Others confess they remained silent, frozen by shock, unable to comprehend that the ship was truly sinking. Through it all, you listen quietly, feeling the weight of injustice settle upon your chest. The tragedy was not merely one of nature, it was one of structure, inequality, and a world designed to protect some lives more than others. That night, you walk back to the guest house slowly, watching the lamps flicker along the street. The city is alive with sound, but you feel disconnected from it, as though you are walking through a dream. People move around you, their footsteps echoing against the pavement, unaware of the cold ocean that still clings to your skin. In your room, you sit on the edge of the bed and close your eyes. The hearings have pulled open wounds you did not realize you carried. You feel the ache of truth pushing through the silence, forcing itself into the light. And yet, beneath the ache, there is something else. A quiet determination. A belief that perhaps this painful process will lead somewhere meaningful, somewhere new. Across the ocean, the British inquiry continues to build its fortress of explanations. Testimony filters through newspapers, twisted by politics and pride. British officials insist that the iceberg was unforeseen, that the weather was unusually clear, that the ship was built stronger than regulations required, that lifeboat numbers met legal standards. They shift the blame toward nature, toward fate, toward anything that does not threaten the foundation of their maritime empire. And so, two worlds begin to diverge. In America, the focus is on accountability. In Britain, the focus is on preservation. Both inquiries move forward like trains on parallel tracks, heading toward conclusions shaped by the cultures that built them. You lie back slowly, letting your body sink into the mattress. The faint hum of distant city traffic drifts through the window. You breathe in, letting the air fill your lungs, and breathe out, letting the tension soften. Your eyelids grow heavy. The world around you darkens. And as you drift towards sleep, you realize that the story of the Titanic is becoming something much larger than a shipwreck. It is becoming a battle over truth, memory, and the human need to make sense of the senseless. It is a story that will shape laws, lives, and legacies. And it has only just begun. The days following the sinking stretch out like a long grey ribbon across the Atlantic world. What began as shock has transformed into something heavier and sharper. In newspaper columns and private letters, in the whispers of drawing rooms and in the tight circles of grieving families, a single question emerges with relentless clarity. Who will pay for what happened? You wake in your small room on the Upper West Side to the sound of footsteps in the hallway. Survivors move softly through the guest house, their voices low and strained. Some are preparing to return home. Others are waiting for word about lost family members. Many linger because they have nowhere else to go. You sit up slowly, rubbing your eyes, and feel the heaviness in your bones that has lingered since the night the Titanic sank. It is not something sleep can cure. A volunteer knocks gently on your door and hands you a newspaper. You unfold it and see a headline that feels like a blow to the chest. White Star Line already discussing compensation. The article explains that lawyers are calculating the monetary value of lives lost aboard the Titanic. You read the numbers twice, then a third time, trying to make sense of them. The sum is shockingly small, insultingly small, the kind of sum that suggests a human life is worth little more than the ink used to print the offer. In another column, a journalist quotes a company representative proclaiming that White Star Line bears no responsibility for the tragedy. They argue the sinking was an act of God, unavoidable and unforeseeable. They describe the iceberg as a natural anomaly. They insist the ship was built to the highest standards. They gloss over the lifeboat shortages, the ignored warnings, the excessive speed. You feel a coldness settle in your stomach as you lower the paper. Later that day, you return to the hearing. The ballroom is crowded, the air thick with murmurs. Survivors cluster together like drifting islands, some leaning on each other as though their bodies are still trying to steady themselves after hours spent adrift in the North Atlantic. Reporters sharpen their pencils. Lawyers smooth their suits and clear their throats. The senators arrive with stacks of documents and weary, determined expressions. The inquiry is drawing out truths that no one expected to confront. The witness called today is a quiet man with grey hair and tired eyes. He is an insurance agent representing several companies that underwrote the Titanic. He speaks in calm, emotionless tones as he explains the monetary value placed on the ship, the cargo, and the passengers. He describes policies, liability limits, and maritime regulations written decades earlier. He speaks of numbers as though they are facts of nature, unbendable and unfeeling. Then he outlines the total compensation the White Star Line is prepared to pay. Reporters lean forward. Survivors stare at him, breaths held. You feel your own hands curl into fists. It is not enough. Not remotely enough. It is the kind of sum that erases people. It reduces the last breaths of 1,500 souls into something tidy, something manageable, something that can be tallied on a ledger and closed with a signature. When he finishes, a woman in the audience stands abruptly, her face pale with fury. She has lost her husband and 2 sons. Her voice trembles as she asks him how a corporation can decide the worth of a life. The man lowers his eyes. He cannot answer. Lawyers intervene, ushering her to her seat, but her grief lingers in the air like a haunting echo. Others begin to stand as well. A father whose daughter died in the freezing dark. A widow whose husband gave up his seat on a lifeboat. A young woman who survived, but whose parents did not. Their voices mingle in a rising wave of anger and sorrow. For a moment, the hearing teeters on the edge of chaos. Senator Smith bangs his gavel repeatedly, trying to restore order, but the human heart refuses to be quieted by the sound of wood striking wood. Eventually calm returns, but it is a thin calm stretched over a deep chasm. In the days that follow, testimonies grow more emotional, more raw. Survivors confess guilt they cannot shake. Crew members describe nightmares that will not leave them. Some break down entirely on the stand, unable to continue, as memories of that night rush back with merciless clarity. The hearings are no longer simply about facts or timelines. They have become something more intimate, an exorcism of collective trauma. You begin to notice a pattern. The wealthiest survivors have access to lawyers, to interviews, to platforms that amplify their voices. Their stories dominate the newspapers. They are invited to elegant homes to recount their experiences to audiences sipping tea from fine porcelain. But the poorer survivors, the immigrants, the laborers, the families from third class, struggle quietly in the shadows. Many lost everything, not just loved ones, but possessions, savings, futures. And they receive little attention. They are given small stipends from charitable organizations, but these cannot rebuild the lives washed away by the Atlantic. One afternoon, you sit beside a mother from third class. Her hands tremble as she folds and refolds a small handkerchief. She tells you how she arrived in America, with nothing but the clothes she now wears and the memory of her child slipping from her arms in the icy water. She has no relatives in the country, no connections, no home to return to. She asks you whether you think she will receive enough compensation from the company to survive. You cannot bring yourself to answer. The truth is too cruel to speak. Across the ocean, the British inquiry continues to shape its narrative. Experts testify that the iceberg was invisible. Officers explain that decisions made during the voyage were reasonable for the conditions at hand. Lawyers argue passionately that the ship was built to regulations, and therefore no blame can be assigned to those who followed the rules. What they do not say is that the rules themselves were outdated, inadequate, and dangerous. But rules, unlike people, cannot be cross-examined. The Board of Trade's goal is not accountability. It is preservation, preservation of reputation, preservation of commerce, preservation of national pride. Survivors sense it, reporters sense it, even some witnesses sense it. But the machinery of the inquiry moves steadily forward, indifferent to discomfort. 2. Meanwhile, the Senate hearings in New York begin to reveal something profound. The sinking was not an isolated tragedy. It was the inevitable result of a system that valued efficiency over caution, spectacle over safety, and class over humanity. The senators uncover letters, instructions, policies. They uncover decisions motivated by prestige. They uncover warnings ignored and opportunities squandered. The truth becomes a mosaic of small failures that together created a catastrophe. One evening, after a long day of testimony, you return to the guest house and find a letter slipped beneath your door. It is from a local charity. They are offering assistance to survivors who need clothing, housing, or temporary work. You hold the letter for a long time, feeling the weight of its kindness, but you also feel the weight of everything that cannot be repaired. No amount of charity can restore what you lost. No amount of compensation can erase the cold that still clings to your memory. You sit on the edge of your bed, listening to the distant hum of the city, and realize that survival has a price. It is not paid in money or material goods. It is paid in the quiet hours of the night when memories return uninvited. It is paid in the heaviness of each breath. It is paid in the guilt of being alive. The hearings will continue, the world will argue, lawyers will negotiate, judges will deliberate, and someday soon numbers will be printed in newspapers declaring the final compensation awarded to families. The sums will be heartbreakingly small. They will be insufficient, they will be unfair, but they will be accepted because the machinery of the world is often too large to fight. You lie back slowly and close your eyes. The soft mattress cradles your body. The noise outside fades into a gentle hum. You breathe in, filling your lungs with the warmth of the room, and breathe out, letting go of the tightness in your chest. The night settles around you like a comforting blanket. And as you drift towards sleep, you realize that the struggle for justice is not only happening in courtrooms or inquiries, it is happening within each survivor, in the fragile effort to make sense of a world where some lives were valued and others were not. The story will continue. The wounds will deepen before they can heal. The days after the disaster stretch out in both directions, into memory and into the uncertain future. You wake each morning with that familiar heaviness pressing against your chest, the weight of something that has not yet found its final shape. You are safe now, warm beneath blankets, surrounded by walls that do not shudder or tilt beneath your feet. But there is a part of you still drifting somewhere on the Atlantic, caught between the moment the lights went out and the moment the Carpathia appeared like a miracle on the horizon. Those who survived the Titanic share a strange bond. It is a bond formed not by choice but by circumstance. You see it in their eyes when they gather in the hallways of the guest house, when they sit together at long tables eating meals prepared by volunteers, when they shuffle into the hearing rooms each morning. It is a bond made of silence. Not the silence of peace, but the silence of people carrying stories too heavy to speak aloud. As you walk toward the hearing room today, you notice something that has taken several days to reveal itself. It sits beneath the conversations, beneath the polite greetings, beneath the murmured updates from family members searching for relatives. It is the presence of the third-class survivors, or more accurately, the absence of their voices. They are here, you can see them, but they sit along the walls, often unnoticed. Their clothes are worn, their hands are calloused, their English is sometimes broken or heavily accented. They do not have reporters asking for interviews, they do not have lawyers advocating on their behalf. They do not have invitations from wealthy patrons or dignitaries. They simply sit with folded hands and lowered eyes, waiting for someone to ask them what happened. But almost no one does. In the Senate hearing room, the morning begins with a witness from first class. He is articulate, confident, dressed in a tailored suit that survived the journey because he was able to take a moment to retrieve it before stepping into a lifeboat. He speaks clearly, recalling his experiences with a steady voice. Reporters lean forward eagerly, capturing every word. He provides details about the ship's final hours, about the sound of the boilers, about the angle of the decks as the bow dipped lower. His testimony is important, but as he speaks, you cannot help but glance toward the back of the room. There, a young woman sits alone. Her hair is pulled back into a loose braid. Her dress is plain and worn thin in places. She clutches her hands tightly in her lap. She survived the sinking, but her parents did not. She cannot tell her story because no one has called her name. No one has asked her to take the stand. She watches each witness with wide, tired eyes, as though hoping someone will remember she exists. Her silence becomes a kind of testimony in itself. The Senate hearings claim to seek the truth. But you are beginning to understand that truth has layers. There is the truth spoken aloud by those with the privilege to do so. And then there is the truth carried quietly by those who are never asked. During a break, you wander outside. The air is crisp. People gather along the street, craning their necks to catch a glimpse of survivors as they exit the building. They want to see the faces of tragedy. Some want autographs. Some want stories. Some want to simply witness history. But no one turns toward the young woman in the plain dress. No one asks her where she was when the ship struck the iceberg. No one asks her how she climbed into a lifeboat. No one asks her whom she lost. She steps into the sunlight and disappears into the crowd like a drop of rain slipping into the sea. The hearings resume later that afternoon. A representative from the shipping company steps forward. He speaks with unwavering composure. He uses phrases like regrettable circumstances and unforeseen events. He refers to the passengers not as families or individuals, but as numbers and categories. He insists that protocols were followed. He carefully avoids acknowledging the decisions that endangered thousands. As he speaks, you remember the layout of the ship. The grand staircase illuminated by soft electric light. The dining salons filled with crystal and silver. The smoking room with its velvet chairs. These places belong to those who now dominate the hearings. But you also remember the lower decks, narrow corridors where the air felt humid and close. Rooms with metal bunk beds lined against the walls. Worn suitcases tucked beneath them. Families from Ireland, from Scandinavia, from Eastern Europe. Men, women and children traveling to America with dreams folded neatly into cloth bundles. They had been the last to reach the lifeboats. The last to receive instructions. The last to understand the scale of the catastrophe unfolding above them. And now they are the last to be heard. A senator interrupts the shipping representative, questioning whether passengers in third class had been adequately informed during the evacuation. The representative offers a practiced smile. He explains that all classes had equal access to the lifeboats. He insists that no barriers prevented anyone from reaching the upper decks. He suggests that panic, not structural inequality, caused the heavy loss of life among third-class passengers. You hear murmurs spread across the room. Even some senators shift uncomfortably in their seats. It is a lie, or perhaps it is something more complicated than a lie. It is a version of events crafted to protect institutions, not people. It is a narrative built on assumptions and reinforced by the voices of those who never walked the lower decks. You close your eyes for a moment. In that instant, you hear the echo of metal corridors. You hear footsteps running, searching. You hear someone shouting in a language you do not understand. You hear a mother calling out for her child. You hear water rushing in. You hear the distant groan of the ship. You open your eyes again, and the hearing room comes back into focus. Later that evening, you visit a community shelter where many third-class survivors have gathered. These are the forgotten voices of the Titanic. The room is crowded and warm. Children cling to their mothers. Elderly passengers sit quietly, hands folded, listening to conversations swirling around them. Volunteers move through the space offering blankets, hot meals, and comforting smiles. You sit beside an older man with deep lines etched into his face. He stares into the distance for a long time before speaking. His voice is gravelly. "My wife did not make it," he says softly. "I kept calling her name. I kept looking. But there was too much noise, too much confusion." He tells you how he tried to navigate the unfamiliar corridors of the ship that night, how he followed the crowd, how he felt water rise around his ankles as he climbed the stairs, how he reached the boat deck and saw the last few lifeboats lowering into the sea. "I waved my arms," he whispers. "I begged, but they could not take me." You sit with him until his voice trails off. He wipes his eyes with a trembling hand. Across the room, the young woman from the hearings sits alone again, her hands clasped tightly. You approach her gently. She smiles faintly, grateful for the company. Her story spills out slowly, like water trickling through cracks in a stone wall. She tells you about her parents, how they were saving every penny to start a new life in America, how they believed the Titanic was the first step toward a brighter future, how they held her hands when the ship began to sink, how they pushed her into a lifeboat before disappearing in the chaos. "I screamed for them," she says. "I kept saying I would not go without them, but they insisted." She begins to cry, but her sobs are almost silent, as though grief has worn her down to the point where even her tears are tired. You place a hand gently on her shoulder. She leans into the gesture, her breathing unsteady. Back at the guest house that night, you lie in bed and stare at the ceiling. The room is dark, but not the terrifying darkness of that night on the lifeboat. This darkness is gentle, safe, a kind of sanctuary. You pull the blanket up to your chin and feel its soft weight. The world outside has resumed its rhythm. Carriages pass by, people return to their homes, the lights of the city flicker in warm yellow tones. But somewhere beneath that quiet surface, the stories of the passengers continue to echo, each one a reminder that tragedy does not end when the ship sinks. It lingers in the lives that continue afterward, in the memories carried forward, in the questions left unanswered. And as you drift towards sleep, one realization settles into your mind like a soft whisper. The system that built the Titanic did not just fail the passengers, it erased them, not all at once, but slowly, through hearings that prioritized prestige, through newspapers that favored wealthy voices, through compensation systems that valued property more than people, and through a world that too often forgets those who have the least. The lower decks were silent on the Titanic, and now, in the aftermath, they are silent again. But you heard them, and you will not forget them. Morning settles gently over New York, its pale light spilling across rooftops like the first strokes of a soft watercolor painting. The city hums with life, unaware that inside a quiet hearing room, the future of maritime safety is taking shape piece by fragile piece. You walk through the doors of the Senate chamber with a heaviness that has settled into your bones. You know today will be no different from the others. Another day of testimony, another day of unraveling what was lost, another day of listening to voices tremble under the weight of memory. But today also carries something new, an undercurrent, a subtle shift, a quiet, determined intention to transform tragedy into something that might prevent it from happening again. As you take your seat, you notice charts spread across the senators' desks, diagrams of watertight compartments, lists of wireless regulations, comparisons of lifeboat requirements from country to country. There is a tension in the air, but it is not the same tension of grief and accusation that filled earlier days. It is the tension of change forming, slow, painful, but undeniable. The first witness is a wireless operator from another ship, not the Titanic. He explains how communication between vessels was handled in those days. You listen carefully as he describes a world governed by poorly enforced rules, where wireless operators were often overworked, often unsupervised, and sometimes off-duty during critical hours. As he speaks, you remember the Titanic's distress calls echoing across the ocean, bouncing through the cold air, reaching some ships and missing others entirely. He describes how one nearby ship received the Titanic's signals too late because its operator had gone to bed. He describes how wireless messages were sometimes treated as trivial because they belonged to entertainment companies rather than the government. He describes a system that was built with good intentions but lacked structure, oversight, and accountability. His testimony is not dramatic. It does not contain screams or icy waters or desperate lifeboats, but it is devastating in its own way because it reveals a truth deeper than any personal mistake. The world was unprepared for a tragedy of this scale. The machinery of safety had gaps wide enough for thousands to fall through. Senator Smith leans forward, his voice solemn as he speaks. Would stronger wireless regulations have saved lives? The witness hesitates only long enough to steady his voice. Yes, he answers, many. The word ripples through the room like a quiet storm. Next, experts in ship design take the stand. They speak in careful tones about watertight bulkheads, hull strength, and outdated classifications that underestimated risks. They mention proposals made years earlier to increase lifeboat capacity on passenger liners, proposals that were dismissed as unnecessary. You feel a bitter taste at the back of your throat as you listen. People died not because humans could not build a safer ship, but because no one insisted they should. Later in the afternoon, an engineer displays a diagram of the Titanic's lifeboats. The image is precise, almost beautiful in its symmetry. But the meaning behind it is anything but beautiful. He traces a finger along the lines of the drawing, explaining how many boats should have been on board if regulations had been based on passenger capacity rather than ship weight. He points to spaces where even more boats could have been stored had anyone chosen to prioritize human life over aesthetics. This disaster, he says quietly, was not only avoidable, it was predictable. You feel a chill that has nothing to do with the air in the room. As the hearings continue, pressure builds across the nation. Newspapers publish scathing editorials demanding reforms. Families of the victims write letters to senators. Ministers preach sermons about responsibility. Even school children talk about the Titanic in classrooms, their voices filled with a mixture of awe and fear. The world is waking up to its own vulnerabilities. One evening, after a particularly long day of testimony, you walk through the city streets alone. The lamps glow softly above you, casting golden halos on the pavement. The air smells faintly of rain. You pass a newspaper vendor shouting headlines about the hearings. You pass a family walking hand in hand. You pass a couple sitting together on a bench, their heads close, whispering gently. Life continues, yet you feel suspended between the world that existed before the sinking and the world struggling to emerge after it. You sit on a stone bench in a small park near the courthouse. The cool surface lands silently beneath you as you catch your breath. The city hums around you, but your thoughts are still elsewhere. Out there on the Atlantic, where the moon once shone on tilted decks and broken cries. You close your eyes and breathe deeply, trying to gather your thoughts. In the stillness, you realize something important. The hearings are not just about blame, they are about transformation. The senators are not simply documenting what happened. They are building a foundation upon which new laws will rise. Laws meant to protect those who cannot protect themselves. The next morning, the hearings resume with renewed energy. A senator outlines a draft proposal for mandatory lifeboat capacity equal to every soul on board. Another discusses requiring round-the-clock wireless operation on all passenger ships. A third suggests international collaboration. ensuring that ships crossing any ocean must adhere to the same standards of safety. You watch the witnesses as they nod in agreement, their faces lined with fatigue, but lit by something hopeful. You watch survivors sitting quietly along the walls, some holding hands, some leaning on canes, some sitting with shoulders slumped from memory, but heads held high from resolve. You notice the young woman in the plain dress again. She has taken a seat closer to the front today. She listens intently, her eyes bright, despite the grief she carries. When a senator speaks about the need to protect immigrant families, she closes her eyes for a moment as if absorbing the words like warmth. Her presence reminds you of something essential. The laws being shaped in this room are not abstract, they are personal. They are for people like her, like the older man you met at the shelter, like the children who lost parents, like the families who drowned in the lower decks while searching for an exit. Canada submits recommendations to the investigation as well. So does France, so does Germany. And for the first time, nations begin to speak not as competitors, but as collaborators. The Titanic's legacy is becoming something larger than national pride. It is becoming a blueprint for global responsibility. Late in the afternoon, a senator remarks, "Now the tragedy must not repeat. The ocean will always be vast, but our safeguards need not be small." The room falls silent, moved by the simplicity of the statement. When the hearings break for the evening, you step outside into the fading light. The sun dips low in the sky, casting long shadows across the pavement. A warm breeze brushes against your face, a gentle reminder that the world, despite its cruelties, still holds softness. You begin walking back toward the guest house, passing through streets that are slowly calming after the bustle of the day. A carriage rolls by. A woman hums to a child as she pushes a pram. A shopkeeper closes his door, humming a tune from home. You absorb these peaceful scenes like quiet antidotes to the heaviness inside you. As you walk, a realization settles over you like a soft blanket. Safety regulations may not erase the grief of those who suffered, but they can honor them. They can protect future passengers. They can become the legacy of those who never found their way to a lifeboat. They can be the voice of those who were silenced by locked gates, poor design, and outdated laws. That night, you lie in bed with the window slightly open. The cool air drifts across your face. You pull the blanket up, feeling its comforting weight. The city outside murmurs softly like a distant lullaby. You close your eyes and breathe steadily, letting the rhythm calm your mind. For the first time since the sinking, you feel a small, steady pulse of hope. Not the naive hope that everything is fine, but the mature hope that something better is coming. Something built from sorrow, from truth, from courage. Something shaped by those who survived and those who did not. You drift into sleep slowly, gently, knowing that the laws born from this tragedy will not return the lost. But they will watch over future travelers, guarding them as the Titanic could not. And in that quiet promise, there is a kind of peace. Time moves strangely after a tragedy. For some, it rushes forward in great leaps, desperate to distance itself from the moment everything changed. For others, it crawls slowly, dragging memories like heavy luggage across the years. And for the survivors of the Titanic, time became something fragile, something unpredictable, something they learned to hold gently, like a cracked cup that might shatter with the slightest tremor. In the months after the hearings conclude, the world begins to settle into its newly shaped understanding of the disaster. Laws are drafted, regulations are tightened, maritime safety becomes a subject of international cooperation. But these structural changes, as important as they are, cannot quiet the private storms carried inside the hearts of those who lived through that frozen night on the Atlantic. You return home eventually, not immediately. You spend weeks trying to regain your footing, grounding yourself in a world that no longer feels familiar. When you finally step onto the platform of your hometown station, the air smells different. The trees seem taller than you remember. People walk past you with polite nods, unaware that you have come back from a place where the world split open. Your family embraces you tightly, their arms trembling with relief. But even in their warmth, you feel something inside you remain distant, like a lantern flickering at the end of a long corridor. You smile. You answer their questions gently. But the sound of water still lingers in the back of your mind, a soft hiss that never fully fades. You are not alone in this. Across the world, every survivor grapples with the same invisible currents. Some, like the wireless operator Harold Bride, return to work out of necessity. He limps into the Marconi office with bandaged feet and haunted eyes. People cheer him as a hero, but the praise passes through him like smoke. He carries with him memories of tapping distress signals into the cold air, while the Titanic groaned beneath him. He carries the silence that followed the final message. Others, like Charles Lightoller, the last officer to step off the ship, bury themselves in duty. He returns to the sea, perhaps because it is the only place that does not ask him to explain why he lived when so many others did not. He becomes known for his steadiness, his calm, his unwavering discipline. Years later, he will command a small vessel during the evacuation of Dunkirk, ferrying soldiers to safety through bombs and fire. He will save countless lives. Yet even then, beneath the roar of war, he will hear the faint echo of the Titanic slipping beneath the waves. There are those who try to erase the event from their lives entirely. They change cities, change names, change careers. They hide their connection to the ship as though it is a wound that cannot be spoken of. Some succeed in building new lives free from the shadow of the disaster. Others wake each night with the taste of icy water in their throats, no matter how far they travel. And then there are the musicians. For a time, their story slips through the cracks of newsprint and legal proceedings. But among survivors, their memory burns bright. The 8 musicians who played on the tilting deck as chaos roared around them are spoken of with reverence, as though they were saints carved from the very soul of the ship. Their families grieve in private. Their belongings arrive weeks later in plain crates, sheet music damp with seawater, bowstrings frayed, uniforms folded carefully by unknown hands. One musician's family receives a bill for 14 shillings, the cost of his uniform deducted from his wages even after his death. When the news becomes public, people across Britain respond with outrage, demanding dignity for the men who played, until the sea swallowed them. Donations pour in. A fund is created. Their legacy grows. But grief always grows alongside legacy. You think often of the young woman you met during the hearings, the one with the plain dress and the soft, quiet voice. You wonder where she went after you last saw her, whether she managed to build a new life, whether she found family, whether she found joy again. She had carried so much loss in her thin shoulders, yet she faced the world with a fragile kind of courage that stays with you. And the older man from steerage, whose hands trembled as he spoke of his wife, what became of him? Did he find work? Did he find a reason to smile again? Or did he fade quietly into the background of a world too busy to notice the shadows beneath his eyes? Survivors scatter across continents, each carrying the same night in different ways. Some marry and raise families, telling the story of the Titanic only when their children are old enough to understand the weight of it. Others slip into silence, refusing to revisit the memory at all. A few become public figures, sharing their experiences at schools, churches, and town gatherings. Their voices tremble, but they speak anyway, determined that the tragedy should not be forgotten. A century will pass before people fully grasp how deeply the Titanic shaped the lives of those who escaped the sinking. Historians will write about trauma, survivors' guilt, and generational echoes of grief. But for the survivors living in the years immediately after the disaster, these concepts do not have names. They are simply shadows that moved beside them. Even you, in your quiet moments, feel these shadows. You find it difficult to board ships now. The groan of wooden planks beneath your feet sends a ripple of fear up your spine. The sound of water splashing against hulls brings back memories too vivid to ignore. You prefer to travel by train when you can. You choose the seat near the window and watch the landscape pass by like a slow, comforting dream. At night, you sometimes wake with your heart pounding. For a moment, you expect to see stars overhead and freezing waves below. But then you feel your mattress beneath you, warm and steady. You breathe deeply, reminding yourself that you are safe. Time helps, but it does not fully heal. Years pass, the world changes, wars ignite and fade, technologies advance, new ships are built stronger, safer, more carefully regulated. Yet the Titanic returns to headlines again and again. Books are written, lectures are given, survivors are interviewed in front of crowded halls, and every retelling shapes the memory of the ship in new ways. Slowly, the tragedy becomes more than an event. It becomes a symbol of human ambition colliding with nature's indifference. A symbol of class inequality laid bare under the cold moon. A symbol of courage and cowardice woven together in impossible knots. A symbol of grief and memory and the fragile line between life and death. Even after the survivors grow old and pass away, the story continues to breathe. New generations discover it with awe and sorrow. They look at photos of the ship, marveling at its size and elegance. They listen to accounts of its sinking and feel a chill that spans oceans and decades. The Titanic becomes timeless, not because of its grandeur, but because of the human stories that refuse to fade. One evening, many years after the sinking, you sit at your table with a worn journal in your hand. You begin to write, not for fame or for history, but for yourself. You write about the feeling of the lifeboat rising and falling on the black water. You write about the sound of distant cries turning into silence. You write about the people you met afterward, their faces etched into your memory. You write so you will not forget. You write so your children will know. You write because some stories live only if they are told. Outside your window, the world moves gently forward. Leaves rustle in a soft breeze. Cars pass by with steady hums. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell rings. You breathe deeply, laying the pen down at last. The life you built after the disaster is imperfect, but it is yours. It is proof that even in the face of unimaginable loss, humans find ways to continue, to rebuild, to love, to dream. You exhale slowly, letting the moment settle like warm light across your chest. The Titanic took much from you, but it did not take your entire life. And that realization, quiet and steady, brings a peace you once believed impossible. Decades pass, and the Titanic drifts deeper into legend. Its memory lingers in books, in whispered stories, shared between generations, in the soft trembling of voices that still remember the night the world changed. And yet, as the years accumulate, something else grows alongside the myth, a yearning to find the ship itself, to look upon the lost giant where it lies in eternal darkness. It is human nature to seek answers in the places where we left our questions. For a long time, the Titanic remains hidden. No one knows exactly where it rests. Early attempts to locate the wreck fail. The Atlantic is vast and unforgiving, its depths blacker than night, colder than memory, more guarded than any fortress built by human hands. The technology of the early 20th century is simply too primitive to reach so far, too fragile to withstand the crushing pressure of the deep. But while the ocean remains silent, survivors continue to carry their private storms. As you age, your memories soften around the edges. They become quieter, gentler, like waves smoothing the surface of a jagged stone. But they never disappear. Even in the stillness of middle age, you sometimes feel the sway of a lifeboat rocking beneath you. Even in the comfort of your home, you sometimes hear the faint, echoing cries of that terrible night. You learn to live with these ghosts, to walk beside them rather than fear them. You think of other survivors often. Some have passed away, their stories fading like footprints washed away by the tide. Others have become guardians of the tragedy, speaking at events, preserving artifacts, fighting against the world's slow forgetting. You read their interviews in newspapers, thinking how strange it is that people look upon them with awe, as if they belong to a different kind of humanity. But they were just people caught in the wrong place at the wrong time, forced to carry memories they never asked for. The world changes around you. Radios become televisions, ships become airplanes, empires fall, wars rise, countries redraw their borders. Humanity sends rockets into the sky, exploring stars and planets. And still, beneath 2.5 miles of crushing water pressure, the Titanic waits, untouched by the passage of time, except for the slow, patient corrosion of salt and shadow. In the 1970s, a new kind of dream begins to form. Oceanographers, engineers, and explorers start to wonder whether technology has finally caught up with curiosity. Unmanned submersibles are developed. Sonar becomes more precise. Countries invest in research vessels capable of mapping the seafloor with unprecedented accuracy. One man, Dr. Robert Ballard, becomes captivated by the idea of finding the Titanic. Not for glory, not for fame, but for closure. Closure for the world, and closure for the families who never had a grave to visit. He imagines a future where humanity can finally look upon the ship, not as a legend, but as the tangible remains of a story too painful to fade. You read about these efforts in newspapers. You are older now, your hair touched with silver, your hands slower than before. But when you see the Titanic mentioned in print, you feel the same quiet shiver you felt as a young survivor navigating the aftermath. Memory is strange like that. It folds time into itself. It closes distances that should be impossible. In 1985, late on a calm September night, the world changes again. It happens carefully, quietly, without fanfare. A sonar reading flickers, a camera follows, a ghostly shape emerges from the darkness, a massive boiler half buried in sediment, then another. And then, at last, the unmistakable bow of the Titanic, rising from the ocean floor like the remains of an ancient cathedral. Its railings are still intact, its anchors still sit in place. The ship seems to be sleeping. The world erupts in disbelief and wonder. Newspapers print the discovery on their front pages. Television screens flicker with grainy footage from the deep. Families of victims gather around their sets, weeping softly as they see the place where their loved ones spent their final moments. The Titanic has been found. The wound that once felt raw and gaping now feels different. Still painful, but no longer lost in the void. You sit alone in your living room as the news broadcast unfolds, your hands shaking as you hold the edge of your chair. The camera pans across the bow, the rivets, the rusticles forming delicate, ghost-like shapes. You lean closer to the screen. You do not blink. You feel something stirring in the depths of your chest, an ache that is equal parts sorrow and relief. For the first time in over 70 years, you look upon the ship that shaped your entire life. You whisper softly, almost without meaning to.
There you are.
It is strange to see it again, this time still and silent, resting gently on the ocean floor. It feels almost peaceful, as if the Titanic has finally found a resting place where the world cannot harm her, where time moves slowly and tenderly, where no one screams and no one sinks. But as the camera drifts across the seafloor, you see something that steals your breath. A pair of shoes. They sit beside one another, partially covered in silt, shaped like the absence of a body that once filled them. Shoes do not survive long unless they are anchored by something heavy. The ocean took the body, but the shoes remain like sentinels guarding the memory of someone whose name you will never know. You stare at them for a long time. Your vision blurs, your throat tightens. Those shoes are all that is left of a life that laughed, breathed, hoped, feared, a life that mattered. The discovery of the ship reignites public fascination with the Titanic. Books are written, documentaries are produced, museums display new artifacts brought up from the deep. China plates, jewelry, pieces of flooring, fragments of clothing. Each item becomes a doorway into the past, a whisper from a world preserved in cold darkness. But not everyone agrees on how the wreck should be treated. Some argue that it should remain untouched, a sacred grave. Others believe artifacts should be recovered before they decay beyond recognition. Debates flare, opinions clash, the world grapples with how to honor the dead while satisfying the living. You understand both sides. You want the story preserved, you want the memories held gently in the hands of future generations. But you also know the ocean is a graveyard, and graves deserve respect. You wonder what the other survivors would think, whether they would feel comfort or violation at the idea of their past being lifted from the deep. Years pass again. You grow older. Your hands tremble now when you hold your teacup. Your breaths come more slowly as you walk through your garden. Sometimes you catch yourself staring out the window, imagining the Titanic lying quietly beneath 2.5 miles of water, surrounded by darkness and slow, drifting particles of life. It feels like the ship is still speaking, even without words. As the 20th century draws to a close, the Titanic becomes more famous than ever. Movies are made. Dramatizations capture both the grandeur and the tragedy. People who were not alive when the ship sailed now speak of it with reverence. School children write essays about it. Tourists visit exhibitions filled with artifacts brought from the sea floor. The Titanic has become immortal, not through triumph, but through heartbreak. One evening, long after the sun has set, you sit alone in your armchair, wrapped in a soft blanket. The room glows with the warm light of a single lamp. You close your eyes and breathe deeply. You are tired in the way only age can bring. But there is peace in your exhaustion, a peace born from years spent carrying memories and learning to let them rest gently. You picture the Titanic again lying silently on the seafloor. You imagine the water moving slowly across the bow. You imagine the rusticles trembling with the soft currents. You imagine the shoes resting quietly in the silt. You know the world will continue to tell the story long after you are gone, and that is enough. You whisper softly into the quiet room, "We remember." Because memory is its own kind of resurrection, and remembrance is the only gift the living can offer the dead. There is a moment in every great tragedy when it shifts from being a wound to being a story. Not because the pain disappears, but because the world cannot hold grief forever. Slowly, piece by piece, pain transforms into narrative. Something carried forward not in screams but in whispers, not in tears but in remembrance. And so it happened with the Titanic. In the decades after the wreck was discovered, the ship no longer belonged only to historians or to families, or even to the few survivors still living. It belonged to everyone. It became a mirror in which humanity saw its own ambitions, its own failures, its own fragility. And with each passing year, that mirror grew clearer. You are older now. The world around you moves at a pace your body no longer tries to match. Cars rush past your window. Children play in the park with bright voices and bright futures. People carry small devices in their pockets that can speak across oceans. Something unimaginable in your youth. Everything feels sharp, fast, electric. Yet in the quiet moments, you sense the past moving beneath the surface of your thoughts like a slow tide returning. You sit in your favorite chair, wrapped in a warm blanket, watching the soft dust float in the afternoon sunlight. A biography of Captain Smith rests on your lap. A cup of cooling tea sits beside you. Outside, the wind rustles the leaves, lifting them into small spirals. The world feels gentle today, as if time itself has softened. And then, because memories have their own mysterious clock, a familiar image rises in your mind. The glow of lanterns on the lifeboat, the sharp sting of icy spray, the haunting silence after the cries faded. You inhaled slowly, you exhale even slower. After all these years, the memory no longer claws at you. It simply sits beside you, a companion you have learned to respect. You are not the only one who carries such ghosts. Across the world, as the Titanic enters the twilight of the 20th century, survivors are interviewed one by one. Their faces, lined with age, appear on television screens. Reporters lean in, asking questions that still feel raw, despite the decades that have passed. Some survivors answer quietly, offering fragments of memory like delicate artifacts. Others refuse to speak at all, safeguarding the sanctity of their pain. People listen to these survivors with reverence, as though hearing voices from another world. They are no longer seen as victims or witnesses, they are time travelers, living bridges between past and present. But bridges eventually weaken. As the years unfold, the number of survivors dwindles. One passes away quietly in her sleep, surrounded by family. Another slips away in a nursing home, his memories fading into silence. A third dies suddenly, leaving behind a diary filled with thoughts she never shared publicly. Each death feels like a candle being extinguished in a vast, dark cathedral. Each loss brings the world closer to a moment that once seemed impossibly far away. A world with no one left who remembers the night the Titanic sank. And as that moment approaches, something remarkable happens. The world begins to hold the story more tightly. Books multiply. Documentaries flourish. Museums expand their collections. The discovery of the wreck ignites new waves of fascination. People who have never seen the ocean feel drawn to it through the story of the Titanic. Children ask their parents what happened. Teachers dedicate entire lessons to the tragedy. Historians debate new findings, and filmmakers begin to imagine how the story might look on the big screen, how the sinking might sound, how the ship's final descent might feel when brought to life again. It is strange witnessing your own trauma become spectacle. At times it feels surreal, almost intrusive. At other times it feels like an honor. After all, remembering is the only way the lost can continue to exist in the world of the living. One evening, you sit with an old friend, one of the last survivors you still keep in touch with. Her hands are thin, her skin translucent, her eyes bright despite the years. You talk about the past not with pain, but with softness. Do you ever grow tired of people asking you about it? You ask gently. She smiles, a fragile curve of her lips. Sometimes, she admits. But I think perhaps we owe the dead our voices. If the world wants to hear, then maybe that is a blessing. You nod. You understand. Your lives have become vessels carrying memories from a night most people can only imagine. By telling the story, you keep the truth from sinking, You spend the following years in peaceful routines. You tend your garden, you read, you write letters to family. You attend small gatherings where people speak politely and sip tea. You visit museums, standing quietly before Titanic exhibits, reading the plaques with a stillness no one around you understands. Sometimes you see people wipe tears from their eyes. Sometimes you see them gaze with awe. The ship touches different hearts in different ways. One day, a young student recognizes you from an interview you gave years earlier. She approaches shyly, her voice trembling.
"I want to study maritime history," she says, "because of your story."
You smile, moved beyond words. You realize then that the legacy of the Titanic is not found in steel or rivets or wreckage. It is found in the lives it continues to shape, in the inspiration it sparks, in the lessons people carry forward, and in the reminders it offers about humility, compassion, and the fragile boundaries between safety and disaster. As the century reaches its end, a monumental film is released retelling the Titanic story with sweeping music and grand visuals. The world is mesmerized. Audiences line up for hours. People cry openly in theaters. Suddenly, the Titanic is everywhere again, woven into conversations, culture, and the collective imagination of millions. You watch the film at home, the screen glowing softly in the dark. Some scenes are beautiful, others are painful, but you feel grateful that the world still cares, that the memory of the ship and the souls aboard it remains alive.
Not long after the last survivor passes away,
the news reaches you quietly like a feather drifting onto your shoulder. You place the newspaper down, close your eyes, and breathe deeply. You feel a shift inside you, a soft ache. Something precious has changed. A door has closed gently on an entire generation.
You are alone now. Not alone in the world, but alone in your lineage of memory. The last heartbeat that experienced that night has fallen silent. The final living witness has become part of history.
The Titanic has officially crossed the threshold from living memory into pure myth. You sit beside your window as the sun sets, the sky glowing in shades of amber and violet. Birds settle into branches. People stroll along the street. The world feels peaceful, quiet, reflective, like a lullaby humming gently beneath the surface of time. You understand something fully now, something you sensed years earlier but never articulated. The Titanic is no longer just a disaster. It is a story about being human, about the delicate balance between hope and fear, about the choices we make and the consequences we never see coming, about the way life can fracture in a single instant, but also about the way people rise again and again, carrying memories forward with tenderness and resolve. The tragedy has become a tapestry woven from grief and reverence, from truth and myth, from sorrow and remembrance. It stretches across generations, teaching, warning, inspiring. You close your eyes. For the first time, the memory of that night does not feel heavy. It feels lighter, almost luminous, as though the years have polished it into something sacred. You whisper softly to the empty room, "We will not forget." And in the quiet that follows, you feel the story settle gently around you like a warm, comforting blanket, threaded with loss, threaded with love, threaded with the timeless resilience of the human heart. There comes a point in every long life when the world feels both impossibly vast and intimately small. You sit by the window of your quiet home, wrapped in a blanket that has softened through decades of washing, and listen to the muted sounds of a world that continues to move beyond your reach. Cars drift by like slow waves. Children laugh in the distance. A radio plays a gentle melody that floats through the late afternoon light. It is peaceful, almost tender. You turn your gaze toward a framed photograph on the table beside you. Not a photograph of the Titanic. No survivor keeps one of those. But a picture of your family. Smiling faces. Generations that exist because you survived. You trace your fingers gently along the edge of the frame, thinking of how many paths were shaped by a single moment on a cold April night. Life, you realize, is not a straight line. It is a fragile braid of accidents and choices, of tragedies endured and blessings received. In the quiet hum of your home, you feel the story of the Titanic stirring again, not as a wound this time, but as a living presence. Not an intrusion, but a visitor, a companion that has walked beside you for your entire life. You lean back in your chair, close your eyes, and let your breath slow.
Memory folds open like an old book.
You find yourself thinking not of the screams or the icy waves, but of what came after. The way the world held the Titanic in its collective imagination, reshaping the story again and again like a piece of sea glass polished by time. You recall the first time someone referred to the Titanic as unsinkable, before it became a symbol of hubris. The phrase was printed in brochures, spoken with confidence, whispered with awe. People believed in the ship because they wanted to believe in progress, in engineering, in human mastery over nature. The Titanic represented everything the 20th century promised: power, elegance, control. But nature has a way of reminding us that control is a fragile illusion. Over the years, you watch this shift happen. At first, people spoke of the Titanic as a triumph undone by fate, a magnificent ship felled by an unlucky collision. Then they spoke of it as a lesson in arrogance, a cautionary tale about the dangers of believing we are immune to disaster. Later still, they spoke of it as a symbol of inequality, of the lives lost not because of an iceberg, but because of locked gates, rigid hierarchies, and a society designed to protect the privileged above the vulnerable. And through all these interpretations, technical, moral, emotional, the ship became bigger than itself, a paradox, a myth, a mirror. You think of the countless individuals whose names the world now remembers. Captain Smith, whose proud beard and solemn eyes appear in every book. Molly Brown, whose courage lit up Lifeboat 6. Thomas Andrews walking silently through the ship he helped create, touching the walls as though saying goodbye. The musicians bowing their heads as they played their final notes. You think, too, of the ones the world does not know. The families from steerage, the children who never grew up, the workers whose names were misspelled on passenger lists, the crew members who shoveled coal until water poured over their boots. Their stories are quieter, often untold, but no less sacred. It occurs to you, as you sit there listening to the soft ticking of the clock on the wall, that the Titanic's legacy is not found in cold steel or rusted beams. It is found in the stories, spoken, written, sung, transformed, reborn. Stories are the true lifeboats. They carry the dead across time. You rise slowly from your chair and walk toward your bookshelf. Your fingers trail along worn spines, histories, memoirs, collected letters. You pull out a small book, a survivor's account written decades ago. The pages smell faintly of age and dust. You open to a random passage and read a few lines. The words feel familiar, like the echo of your own memories rewritten in someone else's voice. You close the book gently and return it to the shelf. Outside, the sky begins to darken, the fading light taking on a deep, purple glow. A breeze carries the scent of rain. You rest your hand on the windowsill and look up at the first stars flickering into existence. How many times, you wonder, did those stars watch over the Titanic on its maiden voyage? How many eyes looked up at them from the decks, marveling at the beauty of the night sky, unaware that beneath the shimmering constellations lay a bed of ice, sharp and silent, Stars are witnesses. They do not intervene. They simply observe. And yet their presence comforts you. You think of the day you visited a Titanic exhibition many years ago. You walked slowly past the displays, each artifact encased in glass like a preserved tear. A pocket watch frozen at the moment it touched the water. A hair comb, a porcelain dish perfectly intact, a child's toy. People around you whispered, their footsteps light, as though afraid to disturb the spirits lingering in the hall. You remember standing before a recreation of the grand staircase, gazing upward at the gleaming dome of painted sky. For a brief moment, you felt as though time had folded, as though you were standing once again on the ship, listening to laughter, to string music, to the faint clink of champagne glasses. But then the moment faded, and you were left with an ache that was neither sorrow nor longing, but something between the two. You wondered then, as you wonder now, what the Titanic symbolizes for the world. Perhaps it symbolizes the heights of human ambition and the depths of human vulnerability. Perhaps it embodies the dream of progress paired with the reminder that nature is indifferent. Perhaps it teaches us that no matter how advanced we become, we are still fragile beings navigating a world beyond our control. But you also know this. The Titanic reveals the best of humanity too. In the lifeboats, strangers held one another. On the deck, men stepped aside so women and children could live. Musicians played until the sea took them. Crew members ushered panicked passengers into boats. Even as water rose around their ankles, people shared blankets, prayers, and final embraces. Courage bloomed in the darkest hours. This, you think, is the true meaning of the Titanic. Not the sinking, not the steel, not even the tragedy, but the human heart, illuminated under unbearable pressure. You sit again, feeling a gentle fatigue settle into your limbs. The room grows darker. You reach for a small lamp and switch it on. A warm glow fills the space. You think of the last survivor, now gone. You think of all those who came before her, their memories released into the world like small lanterns drifting across a quiet river. You think of your own memory, still burning, still fragile, still alight. And suddenly, you realize something profound. You are part of that lantern-lit river. Your memory of the Titanic is itself an offering, a way of keeping the story alive, not out of obligation, but out of love, for the people who lived, for the people who died, and for the world that continues to seek meaning in their story. You close your eyes and breathe deeply, letting the moment wash over you. The Titanic is no longer just an event you survived. It is a chapter of humanity, a symbol shaped by countless hands, a story that will outlive every one of us.
And you, quietly, gently, have become one of its storytellers.
As you sink into the cushions of your chair, wrapped in the soft hush of evening, you feel a kind of peace that has taken a lifetime to arrive. The story will continue long after your voice falls silent, and that, you think, is exactly how it should be. Years settle around you like gentle snowfall, softening the sharp edges of memory, but never fully covering them. You continue your quiet routines, finding comfort in the familiar rhythm of days, the morning sunlight that creeps over the windowsill, the kettle that whistles softly, the books arranged on your shelves like old friends. Life has become simple, steady, and warm. But even in this peaceful rhythm, the Titanic lingers, not as pain, not as fear, but as a delicate thread woven into the fabric of your being. Some days you barely notice it, others it tugs gently, reminding you that the past is never truly gone. It is simply folded inside you, a quiet companion. One afternoon, you receive a letter. It arrives in a cream-colored envelope, the paper thick and formal. The handwriting is careful, elegant. You open it slowly, curious. Inside, you find an invitation from a maritime museum hosting a new exhibition on the Titanic. They ask if you might attend the opening ceremony as an honored guest, one of the few still alive who carry first-hand memories of the voyage. You sit for a long moment, the letter resting on your lap. You feel both humbled and hesitant. You have spent a lifetime learning how to carry your memories gently. But something inside you whispers that you should go, not for the event itself, but for the quiet reckoning it promises. A week later, you arrive at the museum. The building is tall and graceful, its glass entrance catching the afternoon light. Visitors gather near the doors, murmuring with anticipation. Children hold their parents' hands. Students carry notebooks. Elderly couples lean on canes as they wait patiently. You step through the entrance, moving slowly among them, each step steady and deliberate. Inside, the lighting is soft, warm, almost reverent. It reminds you of candlelight in a quiet chapel. A museum guide greets you with a gentle smile and leads you to the exhibition hall.
And then you see them, the objects.
Behind clear glass, carefully lit, arranged with the tenderness of someone laying flowers on a grave. A leather suitcase, its corners worn, a silver pocket watch stopped at the moment it touched the water. A pair of spectacles with one lens cracked, a child's porcelain doll with chipped paint, a steward's brass button polished to a faint gleam, a necklace recovered from the wreck, its chain tangled like a frozen tear. You feel your breath catch in your chest. Objects like these have a way of speaking without words. They carry memory in their silence. They remember things people forget. A placard beside the suitcase reads, "Recovered from the debris field, 1987." Another reads, "Personal effects belonging to an unidentified passenger." You pause before each description, imagining the hands that once held these things, the stories that lived inside them. You approach a glass case holding a pair of small shoes. They are dark, their leather cracked with age, but they retain their shape, the curve of the arch, the gentle slope of the heel. You remember the photograph of shoes on the seabed, the ones that haunted you when the wreck was first discovered. These shoes are different, preserved here in the air rather than resting beneath miles of water. But they carry the same quiet grief. You look closer, and suddenly you feel the museum around you grow quieter, as though the world itself is holding its breath. These shoes belong to a child who should have grown up, laughed, played, run across warm grass in the summer sun. But instead, the ocean holds their story. Your hand hovers near the glass, as if reaching through time itself. A curator approaches with soft steps, sensing your stillness. "Objects like these," he says gently, "help people understand that the Titanic was not just a ship. It was a world filled with lives, with dreams, with small details that make us human." You nod silently. You understand more deeply than he knows. The ceremony begins soon after. A small crowd gathers around a podium where a historian speaks about the Titanic's legacy, how the ship changed maritime laws, how its story continues to shape culture, how its memory has endured longer than anyone could have predicted. You listen quietly, your hands folded in your lap.
Then the historian invites you to speak.
A hush falls over the room as you step forward. People turn toward you, their expressions tender and attentive. They are not looking at you as a relic of history, but as a living bridge to a moment they can only imagine. You place your hands gently on the podium and draw a slow breath. "I was very young," you begin softly. Your voice trembles slightly, but not from fear. "I remember the cold. I remember the silence. But I also remember the people. Not just the ones who died, but the ones who lived. Those who helped, those who tried, those who cared. You look into the crowd and see eyes glistening with emotion. We often speak of the Titanic as a tragedy, you continue. And of course it was. But it was also a story about humanity. Everyday humanity. People gave away their seats in lifeboats. People comforted strangers. People held hands in their final moments, so no one had to die alone. You pause, feeling the memories settle gently around you. We must remember the ship, you say. But we must also remember the people, their courage, their kindness, and their stories. The room is silent for a heartbeat. Then soft applause grows like a rising tide, gentle and respectful. You bow your head lightly, grateful both for the recognition and for the quiet dignity of the moment. After the ceremony ends, visitors wander through the exhibition once more. People approach you with gratitude, with compassion, with curiosity. Some share their personal reflections. Others simply thank you for your words. You respond with warmth, though each exchange leaves you feeling a little more tired, as though your memories have been gently stirred from their resting place. As the museum begins to empty, you return alone to the exhibit hall. The curator stands nearby but gives you space. You walk slowly, feeling at peace among the artifacts as though you were visiting old friends. You stop again at the glass case containing the small shoes. In the quiet you whisper, "I remember you." It is not addressed to the shoes themselves, of course, but to the life behind them, the unseen presence, the memory that was never written down. And in your heart you feel an echo, not painful, not sharp, but soft, a recognition, a kind of communion with the past. You stay until the lights begin to dim, the museum preparing to close. The curator offers you his arm as you walk toward the exit. Outside, evening has settled, casting long shadows across the pavement. The air carries the faint scent of night-blooming flowers. You breathe deeply, letting the coolness soothe you. As you make your way home, you feel something shift gently within you, a release, a surrender. Not of the memories, but of the weight they carried. You realize you no longer feel the need to hold them so tightly. They are safe now, preserved in history, in museums, in stories, in the hearts of people who never knew the ship, but feel its presence all the same. Objects remember, people forget, but sometimes when the world listens, memory becomes a bridge between the living and the dead. And tonight, as you settle into bed, wrapped once again in the warm cocoon of your blankets, you feel the bridge holding steady, a quiet promise that the past will not be lost. Life, in its gentle persistence, finds a way to move forward even when memory clings like a shadow. You grow older. Seasons change around you with the rhythm of a soft, unending lullaby. Leaves drift from the trees each autumn. Snow settles each winter. Flowers rise from the earth every spring. Summers pass in warm breezes and golden light. You learn to accept the quiet that comes with age. It is not the silent void of cold ocean water. It is something kinder, like the hush that settles over a room when everyone is asleep and dreams float through the air like soft lanterns. Yet even in these peaceful years, the Titanic remains close to you. Some days, she appears in your thoughts unexpectedly. A memory of the deck's gleaming railings, the feeling of cold wind brushing against your face, the distant hum of engines beneath your feet. Other days, the memories come gently, like waves that kiss the shore and retreat without turbulence. You have stopped fighting them. They are part of you. One crisp morning, a letter arrives, this one handwritten, the ink shimmering faintly in sunlight. It comes from a university that has recently established a historical research center dedicated to maritime tragedies. They invite you not to speak, but to contribute your personal writings, journals, and reflections. They are building an archive of first-hand accounts, they explain, not to sensationalize the past, but to preserve it with dignity. You sit with the letter for a long time. Your journal rests on the table before you, its pages soft from years of handling. You have written so much in it: thoughts, fears, dreams, regrets. Your handwriting changes across the years, beginning firm and decisive, then slowly becoming looser, softer, more fragile. You lift the journal and flip through its pages. Every line is a piece of your life. You decide to donate it. You package it carefully, wrapping it in soft cloth, securing the box with ribbon. As you walk to the post office, the sun warms your face. You feel something lift from your chest, a sense of release, as if the memories inside the journal are not leaving you, but expanding into the world like whispered blessings. Weeks later, a young researcher visits you. She is bright, earnest, filled with gratitude. She speaks gently, aware of the delicacy of your years. She thanks you for your contribution to the archive. She says your writings will help future generations understand not just the facts of the disaster, but the humanity within it, the people, the emotions, the quiet truths. Her words warm you deeply. You realize that this is what memory is meant to do. Not weigh us down, but guide others forward. You invite her to stay for tea. She listens to your words with the reverence of someone holding a fragile artifact. She asks thoughtful questions about the years after the sinking, about how you rebuilt your life, about how grief changed you without defeating you. You answer as best you can, not embellishing, not dramatizing, simply sharing the truth of what it means to live after losing so much. Before she leaves, she hesitates at the door.
"I hope this is not too forward," she says softly. "Babe, do you ever think about returning to the sea?" You smile. It is a tender question. "Yes," you say, "sometimes."
And after she leaves, the idea lingers. Returning to the sea, not to chase the past, not to confront ghosts, but to honor them. Months pass. Your health wavers at times, but your spirit remains steady. On a warm spring day, you feel a gentle pull inside you, an urge to travel one last time, to breathe in the vastness of the ocean that shaped your life.
And so you go.
You board a modest passenger vessel, a far cry from the grandeur of the Titanic. There is no opulence here, no glittering chandeliers or grand staircases, but there is something infinitely more precious. Simplicity, safety, warm faces, caring crew members who guide you gently to your cabin. As the ship begins its journey, you step onto the deck and inhale deeply. The scent of salt fills your lungs. The wind brushes your cheeks. The sea stretches out endlessly before you, a shifting mosaic of blues and silvers dancing beneath the sunlight. You close your eyes and feel your heart steady. This ocean is the same one that took so much from you, yet here it stands, timeless, indifferent, beautiful. Days pass aboard the ship, and you spend much of your time on deck watching waves rise and fall like the breathing of the earth. You speak with other passengers, sharing stories that have nothing to do with tragedy. You laugh softly at small jokes. You sip warm tea as you watch gulls fly in spirals above the water. You rediscover the gentle pleasure of simply being alive. And then one evening, as the sun sinks into the horizon, you feel a quiet stirring deep within you. You walk to a secluded part of the deck, where the sound of water brushing against the hull is soft and rhythmic. The sky glows orange and gold, reflecting on the sea like molten light. You grip the railing gently and memories rise, not with violence, but with grace. The cries, the cold, the stars, the silence. The lifeboat rocking gently in the dark. The faces of those who did not survive. The hands that held yours. The moment the ship vanished beneath the waves. You breathe in slowly, you breathe out even slower. You speak aloud quietly to the horizon. I have carried you with me my whole life, and I am still here. Your voice trembles, but not from fear. It trembles from release, from gratitude, from the knowledge that you have come full circle. The ocean responds with its own voice, a soft, whispering roar as a wave laps against the hull. You smile, feeling tears slip down your cheeks, warmed by the glow of the setting sun.
I forgive you, you whisper.
Not because the ocean deserves forgiveness, but because your heart deserves peace. You stay on deck long after the sun disappears, letting the night settle around you like a gentle cloak. Stars emerge one by one, quiet sentinels watching over you. Their light is soft, familiar, comforting. You feel neither alone nor afraid. You feel whole. You return to your cabin only when sleep begins to pull at your eyelids. You lie down, wrapped in warm blankets, listening to the soft hum of the ship's engines and the distant sigh of waves beyond the walls. For the first time in your life, you feel the ocean, not as something that took from you, but as something that completes the story of who you are. Night settles gently over the ship, its soft darkness wrapping around you like a long, warm exhale. In your cabin, the lights are dim and golden, casting gentle shadows that sway with the slow rhythm of the sea. You lie in bed beneath a blanket that feels almost weightless, yet comforting in the most tender way. The steady hum of the ship's engines vibrates faintly through the floorboards, a heartbeat beneath your own. Outside, the ocean whispers against the hull, its breath as ancient as the world itself. You close your eyes. For a moment, there is no separation between past and present. The memories of a lifetime float upward like drifting lanterns, glowing softly before dissolving into the quiet. You see the faces of those you loved, the faces of those you lost, the faces of those who shaped your journey, even if only for a moment. You see the Titanic, not sinking, not breaking, but rising, rising in memory, rising in meaning, rising in the stories that carried it across generations. Your breath slows, your body softens into the bed, your fingers relax against the sheets. You are no longer a survivor, you are simply someone who lived, someone who witnessed, someone who remembered. The ocean, just beyond your cabin wall, moves with a rhythm older than the stars. Its waves swell and fall like the lungs of the earth, steady and patient. You listen to it, letting its cadence soothe the last tightness in your chest. The fear that once lived inside you has melted into something gentle, like smoothing your hand across worn wood. You think of the night the Titanic vanished beneath the water, the shock, the cold, the exhausted thrashing of limbs, the aching grief, the guilt of surviving. You think of how you carried those memories through every stage of your life, through youth, through middle age, through seasons of joy and seasons of sorrow. You carried them into parenthood, into friendships, into quiet afternoons spent with a book by the window. You carried them into the museums that preserved artifacts, into the letters you wrote, into the moments when the world asked you to speak. And now, at the end of a long and extraordinary journey, you finally set them down. Not because they weigh too much, but because they no longer need to be held so tightly. They have found their place in the world, in archives, in books, in documentaries, in songs, in conversations between strangers who will never meet you.
Memory has done its work. History has taken its shape. You are free.
A gentle knock sounds on your cabin door, barely more than a whisper. A crew member asks through the wood whether you need anything before they turn in for the night. You thank them softly and assure them you are comfortable. The footsteps fade. You turn your head and look toward the small window beside your bed. Through it, you see the ocean stretching into darkness, illuminated only by the moon's pale glow. The water looks calm tonight, its surface shimmering like liquid silver. Each wave rises and falls with unhurried grace, as though the sea itself is breathing deeply, easing into rest. You realize that for the first time in your life, the ocean no longer frightens you. You whisper a quiet thank you to it, not for the loss, not for the pain, but for the strange and unexpected gift it gave you, the understanding that life is not measured by how much we control, but by how much we endure and still choose to love. You imagine the Titanic now resting peacefully in the deep, not broken, not tragic, but quiet, serene, almost sacred. Crusticles drift from its railings like underwater lace. Fish glide through its silent halls. Light filters down in soft beams, touching the once grand staircase with a glimmer like stardust. No chaos, no struggle, only stillness.
In that stillness, you imagine something else, an echo, a whisper, a promise.
They are at peace. All of them. All the souls the ocean cradled, all the lives that ended beneath a moonlit sky, all the dreams that never found land. Peace. It fills your chest so completely that you feel your breath hitch. Not in pain, but in gratitude. Your eyes grow heavy, your breaths lengthen. The line between wakefulness and sleep blurs like mist on a window pane. You think of your younger self, standing on the deck of the Carpathia, clutching a blanket, shivering with shock. You wish you could reach back through time, wrap your arms around that trembling figure, and whisper, "It will be all right, it will be long, it will be hard, but it will be all right. You will live, you will love, you will remember. And one day, you will find peace." Slowly now, you let your thoughts drift. You imagine stepping barefoot onto warm sand. You imagine the ocean before you, endless and blue. You imagine letting your memories rest gently at the water's edge, where the tide can touch them and carry them away. Not to erase them, but to give them a softer place to live. Your body relaxes, sinking deeper into the mattress. Your heartbeat slows. The room grows warmer, quieter. The ship beneath you moves steadily through the night, calm and certain. Its engines hum like a lullaby. You feel yourself drifting with it, carried by something greater than fear, greater than memory, carried by peace. As sleep folds around you like a soft cocoon, the last thought that gently brushes across your mind is this: the Titanic story did not end in disaster. It ended in remembrance. It ended in compassion. It ended in you. Still here, still breathing, still holding the lantern of memory so gently that the flame never flickers. And now at last, you may let it rest. You exhale slowly, the breath warm against your pillow. The ocean whispers, the world quiets, your story softens. And after the last wave, only peace remains.